Okay, welcome back. Now, Britain's High Court has ruled that the government's decision to allow the export of the Lockheed Martin F-35 jet parts to Israel is lawful, despite accepting that they could be used in breach of international humanitarian law. In a 72-page ruling yesterday, judges Stephen Males and Akaran Stein said the case was about, quote-unquote, much more focused issues than just the jet parts. Now, this case was brought by Palestinian non-governmental organization Al-Haq. And joining me now from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank is the spokesperson of that organization, Zainah Haroun. Zainah, always good to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Okay, Zainah, I want to start, of course, it's sort of like a mixed bag of decisions that came out of this. So they're saying that these parts are still lawful to be exported to Israel, but it could be in breach of international humanitarian law, and that's what I want to look at. So there is a sense of a glass half full scenario that can be looked through this.
Yes, so what was interesting about the ruling is that the High Court itself didn't rule that any UK government licensing of F-35 parts, whether directly or indirectly to Israel, don't breach international law. It merely concluded that certain aspects of our legal challenge fall outside of the court's authority. So as if the court didn't want to make a decision on those things and they wanted to leave that decision with Parliament and the Electorate, not the judiciary. So they didn't make a full-on ruling to say whether they breached international law or not. So this is quite significant for our case because it places the full responsibility on the UK government to ensure that it complies with its obligations under international law, including the duty to prevent genocide. Unfortunately, up till now, despite the overwhelming evidence of serious international humanitarian law violations and the commission of atrocity crimes in Gaza, including genocide, the UK government have ignored blatant violations, insisting that they've seen no evidence, for example, of deliberate targeting of women and children. They've withheld critical evidence, and they've used flawed methods to assess whether Israel is committing international crimes or not, which we are arguing that they are. So the government's argument, in essence, before was that it's not up to them to decide. It's for the courts to decide if Israel is committing genocide or if Israel is committing atrocity crimes. Now the courts have handed that decision back to them. There's nowhere really for the UK government to hide.
Zainah, I want to look at that ruling, and there was something quite interesting to pick up there. And I want maybe you could explain to our viewers. They said that part of the decision, meaning that partial parts. So I want to focus on the partial parts meaning and the suspension of partial parts. So what essentially this court ruling is saying is that, okay, we'll suspend partial parts, but the other part of it, you can still go ahead and export that to Israel. So there kind of is a sense of a contradiction here, isn't there?
So what happened during the duration of this kind of long process of this complaint that we filed is that the UK government decided to partially suspend arms sales to Israel. There was around 30 licenses that were suspended. And also in terms of the F-35 fighter jet, which is the deadly bomber, which drops 2,000-pound bombs on densely populated areas in Gaza, the UK is actually responsible only for parts. Even though they are very important, crucial, essential parts of that fighter jet, it doesn't create the entire fighter jet. It doesn't supply the whole of the parts. Now, in September last year, the UK government decided on this partial suspension of arms sales, in addition to the suspension of direct F-35 components to Israel, even though it recognized that those components would still reach Israel indirectly through the F-35 carve-out scheme, which is what a large part of this case was about. And this is the inconsistency that we are arguing undermined its legal and moral position. If it deemed some arms are too risky to send to Israel in light of these potential, in their eyes, violations, which we say there's a wealth of evidence for, then why is it not too risky to send these parts indirectly or not to stop arms sales altogether?
Zainah, I want to touch on the complicity of the UK government. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, they had mentioned that, look, we're going to try and suspend trade. We're going to try and do a suspension of a lot of aspects towards Israel. I mean, you heard David Lammy coming out and, of course, mentioning that even Keir Starmer was quite vocal with regards to that. But it's all talk, isn't it? Because a lot of people, a lot of individuals that I've spoken to from the United Kingdom government have said this UK government doesn't have it in them to go ahead and suspend any sort of talks, any sort of trade with the Israeli government. And that, of course, still aligns to the fact that their complicity in this genocide in Gaza is quite flagrant, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, we as Al-Haq for a long time, for decades actually, have been calling for concrete action to hold Israel accountable for its wealth of violations committed against the Palestinian people and international crimes committed against the Palestinian people. And part of that is breaking that impunity that Israel has enjoyed is to take concrete action such as sanctions, suspending trade deals, anything that could act as a deterrent for Israel to stop it from these ongoing crimes, which is committed from the Nakba, which is ongoing till today. Now, in terms of complicity, the UK government's action or inaction, they have raised grave concerns about complicity in genocide and atrocity crimes, despite this huge evidence that we've been presented with for almost 2 years now, as the genocide has been ongoing. So they've denied deliberate targeting of civilians, they've withheld internal reports that may confirm such abuses. Like as mentioned, they've used deficient methodologies. Also, the main thing that we want to point to as a human rights organization is that the argument that genocide can only be assessed after the fact or after it's been committed or completed is both legally and morally unacceptable. The UK has clear obligations under the Genocide Convention to take all possible measures to prevent genocide. Now, over 18 months ago, the International Court of Justice concluded that there's plausible genocide being committed in Gaza. And since then, every single state, including the UK, has no excuse to say that they didn't know what was going on. And they should have acted decisively to protect the Palestinian people rather than enabling the ongoing atrocities through arms sales and F-35 parts, because that's what we're seeing. Instead of doing everything they can to prevent it, we're still seeing it being enabled. And under international law, states have a serious responsibility to protect civilians and prevent genocide, and failure to uphold this risks complicity in these grave crimes.
Zainah, a public pressure has been quite huge, isn't it? I mean, I was speaking to someone yesterday and they were saying, well, if it wasn't for the public pressure, this court ruling may have been completely different. Is that something that you're assessing from your side also, given that weekend after weekend there have been these marches asking not only for a ceasefire, but also for this genocide to completely be taken away?
Yes, I mean, there's been widespread protests across the UK demanding an end to the genocide and UK complicity. And the government can absolutely not claim ignorance or hide behind the courts. The court said the decision is with them and the electorate, the people who bring them into power. The decisions that they should be making should reflect the people who elected them, the public. And even recently, a YouGov poll confirmed that the majority of the British people oppose arms sales to Israel. So this is something that we need to build the momentum on and continue putting that pressure on the government, and it's part of our next steps. The public pressure needs to be ramped up. The government needs to respect the people who've elected them, and the government can't hide behind the courts anymore, as we've mentioned.
Zainah, one final question. There will be an appeal from Al-Haq, if I stand to be corrected?
So at the moment, we and our partners are considering an appeal. In addition to we're examining the legal arguments and considering our next steps, which could be an appeal at this point in the process. Also, on top of this, we're going to continue pushing for public pressure, as I said, which is more critical than ever. This means members of parliament, civil society, human rights organizations, and the public need to hold the government accountable, since the decision rests with them, as the court says. Also, parliamentary pressure needs to come to end these arms exports to Israel. It needs to come from the parliament itself. So yes, all of these steps will be upcoming. The fight is just beginning. We're by no means stopping here. The genocide is still ongoing in Gaza. people are still being killed as they're queuing for aid. School shelters are still being bombed. Journalists are still being targeted. This is not something we're planning to end in the UK and beyond.
Zainah, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Thank you so much.
That's Zainah Haroun, spokesperson of Al-Haq. While talking about the genocide in Gaza, up next I'm going to be speaking to Samir Zakut. He's based in Deir al-Bala in Gaza. And of course, aid continues to be blocked heading into Gaza, but also the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. 130 charities and NGOs are calling for it to end, given the bloodbath that happens with regards to anyone looking for aid in these zones. That conversation is up next.